But you know why it didn't sound good before? User error, big time. So
It's all good.
I had moved my microphone back to the other machine. So obviously that's not going to work
Oh yeah.
very well. Okay.
Technology.
Yeah. Okay. So we're back, kind of, and the last recording we did sounded pretty good. So,
Okay.
and it's always fun playing with this stuff. Not.
Not. Definitely not. Heck no. Yep. No, yeah, yeah. I guess you were reading those articles too on the Mac, with their updates and how they're basically putting in obsolescence into their devices, planting it so that people buy new devices.
Yeah, oh
So
yeah, that's Apple, right?
yeah, I
That's the
stopped. I stopped using any updates on that kind of stuff years ago because I just realized that my computers ran so much slower after. So
Is that
I
right?
I kind of always figured that they were doing something like that. Not just Apple, but other companies too. I'm sure. So
Hmm.
I just said screw that.
You know
uh,
and this is a different topic, but it kind of goes along the same lines of the public getting screwed over, whether it's by large corporations or their own governments. It's the corruption is just so bad. It's just so off the scale.
yeah.
People can't even imagine it with like the pedophilia and just to name just part of it, you know.
Yeah. Oh, it's ridiculous. I don't know. I don't know. Yeah, it's gonna be a long time, I think, before we rein in that whole mess. So I think.
Indeed.
Oh man, yeah. I was just, yeah. I can look at any facet of life basically, and I was thinking about my calculations again last week, and I realized actually that basically not one thing that I used in those calculations did I learn in school.
Is that right?
Not one aspect of it did I learn in school or from school knowledge. So it just goes to show, to me, very clearly that there's definitely an agenda to hide all of this stuff, and obviously by people who are in control, who have a lot of power and wealth and whatever, and who want to keep it.
Well,
So,
along those lines, we were talking about Brian Forrester and
yeah.
the work he's doing with those elongated skulls.
Mm-hmm.
He gets the same kind of thing in that sometimes these museums will shut down the whole display. One
Mm-hmm.
of the museums in Peru, they shut down the whole display of the elongated skulls for several years. I think they just opened it back up.
Mm. Well,
So, and I think that's part of the history on the Earth. And I don't know if the elongated skulls were maybe some of these extraterrestrial groups that were here during the time of Atlantis and Lemuria, or it's just another kind of Earth humanoid that was developing at the same time. I don't know which.
yeah, yeah. It's kind of hard to figure out because the skulls are, they this mainstream is always saying, oh well, they just flattened them with boards, on their heads, and well, you can't increase the volume of the skull by 25% just by flattening your
Exactly.
skull a little bit. So it doesn't add up.
Right, right, right. There's
And
the
the parietal plates are completely different, which you can't change in a
exact.
human. So
Yeah,
it's completely just total nonsense. It's just like the pyramids and stuff. Like it's just such a bunch of crap that the mainstream is just putting out there just to basically, I don't know, save face or cover somebody's butt who's trying to save face, like religions or who knows who. And so it's just such a bunch of crap. And the
well,
problem is that it's mainstream. So even people who call themselves scientific fall for it.
oh, exactly.
That's what I really don't understand. So these people call themselves scientific. What they've done basically is they memorized a bunch of stuff in school. They forgot about it after the tests or exams were over. They never actually learned the most basic part of science, which was do your own measurements. Do your own measurements. Don't believe anybody, whether it's for or against anything. Otherwise, no matter what, you're going to be at the whim of any person out there who wants to take advantage of something, of someone or whatever. So if you do your own research, your own measurements, which is just like the Meier case, it's just like anything else out there, you will not get screwed by these people. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, no, that's like the biggest annoyance that I see, on a daily basis. And I just never understood it because it isn't complicated. That's the funniest part about this whole thing, is it's not hard to do. It's like grade 3 math. Anybody can do that, so they say, so they claim, but they never actually bother to do it, and that's the difference. They go for the pat on the back, the pat on the head, I passed that exam, or I got this piece of paper, or I got, some diploma or whatever, and they just keep going for the next one and the next one, but they never actually use what they learned, and that's just the weirdest thing, especially when you talk about the most basic math imaginable. You're talking like an 8-year-old child learning this stuff, and so it's just, it's laziness. It's just laziness.
I wanted to step back with one thing you were talking about with the parietal plates and the elongated skulls. I think the elongated skull just has one, maybe two. There's like one seam there in the skull where the typical Homo sapiens sapien has 3, I believe. Is that correct?
I think it's is it the other way around? I think the humans have 3.
Yes, typical humans have 3, I think, and the elongated skull only has either none or just one line across.
Yeah, exactly.
And the elongated skull also has 2 strange holes that appear in the back. Remember that?
Yeah. It looks like some sort of vein or something that would have gone through there. Yeah.
And like you said, 25% more volume or more.
Exactly. The jaws, the teeth, the eyes, the eye sockets, everything. The bone structure is much bigger than any human skulls anywhere. Gosh,
so interesting.
Yeah, I mean, some of them, like the skulls that they find are just flattened with a board.
Right.
But that's, imitation, but that it doesn't account for the actual skulls that are found. And that's, I mean, that's just, when you see the mainstream and how they react to this stuff, it's just such a joke. It's such a joke. I can't believe that they would even try something that monumentally just wrong. So criminal.
Anyway, the book, Brian's book, I did buy it. It's called Elongated Skulls of Peru and Bolivia.
Great.
And the Path of Viracocha.
Okay.
Now, doesn't the Meier material say something about Viracocha?
Rings a bell. I never really looked into kind of matching the two yet together. I just kind of like Brian's work, and they have their perspective on things, and they might call things certain ways, or maybe not the names that they really were. Who knows? I mean, a lot of it is from hearsay and so on too, and so forth. So, but I think it's fascinating to say the least.
I thought somewhere in there, I'm going to have to look up, but the Meier material does talk about that, and I may have spelled it wrong. But
could be. I think there was some sort of battle or something that happened from somebody that went from Egypt or something a long time ago, or who knows what, and I guess got into some sort of a battle with somebody in South America or whatever and lost.
Well, there was this Viracocha was in the highlands of the Andes Mountains, and he was some teacher, and he taught the people in that area science, art, as well as agricultural knowledge. And I believe he had a beard and mustache with which none of the local people could grow. They couldn't grow facial hair, I think.
Exactly. Yeah. I guess there was a statue of him in, what is it, Ollantaytambo or something?
Oh, that sounds right. Right.
anyways, the flat plain near Lake Titicaca there, and where they have all those H block sort of formations that are really hard to pin down
With
from a
Puma
mainstream
Punku?
perspective.
Puma
Puma
Punku?
Punku, that's
Yeah,
the
yeah.
one. Sorry, yeah,
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
the one. Yeah. So I guess around that area there's a statue of a big beardy guy as well, and I think yeah, exactly. So yeah, they couldn't grow facial hair. They didn't have any facial hair.
Now,
So
isn't that strange?
mm-hmm.
If you think about it, because they say those people, and I think one of the things that Brian is doing is proving that some of this stuff isn't completely correct. But they say that all those people in South America came across that land bridge between Alaska and Russia.
Okay.
And you would think the people that came down from there would have had a facial hair because they came from, what,
Yeah.
Siberia, northern Russia, and all that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Well,
exactly.
who knows, you know.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it certainly didn't come from the North Pole because we know Santa has beard. So yeah. No, I guess yeah. No, there's a lot of stuff that's just it's interesting. I mean, I guess Brian goes to Easter Island and stuff too, and does some tours there. And Meier certainly talks about kind of what happened there. And so yeah, no, it's all these sort of if you can look at the world from an engineer's point of view instead of from a historian's point of view, then you're much better off. Then you don't get sucked into not understanding how certain conclusions come about. So then you can look at, like, I was just kind of listening to something about what's his name, the mathematician Newton. Scientist, I guess, and he was really into the pyramids as well, and he obviously figured out, all the things that were going on there, and from a mathematician's point of view. And of course, nobody believed him. The historians dismissed him because they didn't understand him, anyways, and they were probably more interested in just preserving their religious rights, whatever, than they are in actual truth. So, yeah. So I mean. But if you can actually look at the world from an engineer's point of view, then you're much better off. Like when Brian, for example, brings, stone workers and engineers and so on and so forth along to see a lot of how the stones were cut and manufactured, and the hardness of the stone, and what kind of saws would be required to cut through them, and so on and so forth, because the hardness is something that we've only been able to cut through in the last, century or two with diamond saws and so forth. So all these things, when you just kind of add them up, it doesn't take, a degree in physics. You could just figure it out for yourself. So
You're talking about the work of Christopher Dunn?
yeah, I guess doesn't he travel with Brian too sometimes?
Sometimes, yes.
Yeah, I find that interesting. When he
I think
does.
it was Machu Picchu where he was saying that the stones fit together so perfectly that they're closer together than 10,000ths of an inch.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, there was an interesting kind of recent observation about Machu Picchu, and I found that interesting. It's when you actually look at the differences between the monolithic, like what you're talking about with like the perfection, and how it's put together and so on and so forth, versus like the Inca work, which is just basically just rocks kind of strung together with mortar, which the monolithic didn't use mortar, and they were still more robust than anything with mortar or cement or whatever you want to call it.
Right.
But there's actually part of the monolithic structure has been like underneath the structure. There's been like some sort of liquefaction, and like half the structure is kind of it's sort of like split apart in a huge earthquake, and it had to be a huge, like we're talking like 9.5 on the Richter scale kind of earthquake to be able to actually do that kind of a thing. Now, there's no way in hell any of the mortar stuff would have survived that.
Right.
So it has to be, and what you always see in these structures is that the inferior crappy work is always built on the like super high quality monolithic structures. So why would the technology decrease over time? You know, why would they build really, really good quality, you know, buildings, and then on top of them they would start building really crap? Like it just kind of goes against the mainstream archaeological sort of idea that, oh well, you know, things are always improving, and you know, right now is like the pinnacle of technology and history and so on and blah blah blah. Well, it's obviously not the case, because in every single one of the cases that you see, like one after the other, after the other, after the other, it's always the inferior work is built on top of the superior work. So it's just, it doesn't take, you know, even a kindergarten student to realize that. So, I mean, it's just, yeah. When I look at the mainstream archaeology, it's just so lazy. It's so stupid. It's so stupid.
I find that as I'm studying the Meier material, it exposes truth in a way that it's so powerful that it's disturbing in a sense. Mm-hmm. Whenever the information especially relates back to the creation, it's so intense and powerful that it's somewhat traumatic to me, and I have to kind of go back and sift through it and ponder it and reorganize my whole thinking around this new information. And it's the one thing that keeps occurring over and over again with me. You've probably experienced some of that, I would imagine.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I mean, even with Galileo, it's exactly the same. He's been challenging the whole basis of our civilization, basically, since his lifetime. So, and the ideas have not died; they're not going to die, and it's just going to keep revealing basically the fraud of these groups, these power organizations that basically set themselves against him and are losing in history as a result. And Meier is exactly the same. So it's just interesting to me how Meier's previous his spirit form's previous incarnation was actually Galileo. So that to me is interesting because it's very, very similar in nature. The information. So you really have to do your own research, and that's exactly the same with Galileo. You can't just believe him. You have to actually see what he's saying, look through the telescope, whatever, you know, do your own friggin' research. Don't believe him. Don't believe anything he says, and don't believe anything the church says against him, and so on and so forth. Do your own research. Your own research. Not Google links, not, you know, internet links. I mean, actually sitting down and doing some measurements yourself. So that's the difference.
One of the things I was thinking of there when you were talking was the mental fluidal powers, the mental fluidal energies that come out of our brains and, you know, plant themselves in the furniture around us, and, you know, clothes and our skeleton and rings and whatnot. And one of the things that I recently came across is that the old churches and monasteries are places where these swinging waves and fluidal powers are stored. And the Meier material was saying they don't recommend that people go in to those old churches and monasteries because they can have tremendous amounts of thought energy that's stored up, that's, you know, related to grief and trauma and funerals and wrong kinds of thinking. And to the point where I think Billy went into one of these older monasteries in Switzerland and was almost killed just because he's so sensitive to the thought energies. I don't know if you've ever come across that in your studies.
Well, yeah, I mean, whenever I was in church growing up as a kid, you know, we would go every Sunday for a few years, and it would always just make me feel kind of ick inside. It just always made me feel like just uneasy, like just I didn't belong there. I just
kind of dead. Do you feel kind of dead
Oh
inside?
my
Like,
gosh, yeah, and just observing the people and what they're doing, and I just thought, what the hell? I mean, some of these people were school teachers, and they were basically ignoring everything they were teaching me for the rest of the week, and then going to church and trying to pray their problems away. Where, I mean, it's just, why not just apply what you're teaching me in school?
that's so interesting. I recently sent a message to Marianne in Switzerland, and one of the things I said was, so many people that I see, particularly on the media, almost seem like they're mentally ill.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It seems that way.
It's such a difference. I think that the Meier information grounds you so much that when you come across these people behaving in such bizarre ways, it's like, wow, that seems like mental illness to me.
Yeah. Well, this world is like a big mental asylum, and the crazy people have taken over. And yeah,
and that's true.
It is. It's so perfectly true. When I first heard that, a friend of mine said that, and I was like, "Yep, that nails it down completely." So yeah.
Well, one of the things we were talking about before we had all the technical issues, which I had to sort out, is about the motion pictures and the harmful computer games and the way that humans are starting to act compulsively towards torture, hate, guile, murder, revolution. We're literally being programmed by our own media.
Yeah, I know. Well, I mean, even video games are used by intelligence agencies to sort of recruit people into the army and so on and so forth. So, they're not even games. I mean, they're not really games in the sense, they're actually just simulators.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's no actual game going on. It's just a simulation. So, yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I kind of stopped playing games a while ago, video games anyways, and it's tempting sometimes to want to try it, but then I always kind of get immediately bored when I start playing a game, because it's not real. It's not what would happen in reality. It's not, it's just designed in a way to sort of funnel everything towards a certain outcome, and it's not really free in the sense of, well, why don't I just design it this way then? Why don't I change the outcome? Why don't I, whatever. You can't change the outcome, really. I mean, yeah, there's some games that have, several different outcomes, but it's all basically controlled, and it's not, I don't know. It's, the engines, the whatever, it's just so limiting compared to reality. Like I always say, the virtual reality will never be quite as real reality, so why bother? So.
One of the things that I notice is that with some of the new games, and I only see them on YouTube, because they put these games on YouTube, believe it or not. You can't really play them, but you can kind of watch it.
Yeah.
And they move so fast sometimes that it takes they move faster than life, and it's not even enjoyable to me anymore.
No. Yeah.
To watch these.
Well, it was really dumb, actually. I was watching some Star Wars game recently or something that came out. Some game I used to play like a long time ago, and they just released a new version. I was kind of curious to see what it would look like, because I'm a big Star Wars fan, or I used to be anyways. For the old Star Wars, I'll just say I'm a fan of those. And I was thinking the last couple of years, like, all these ships in the Star Wars universe, it doesn't seem like they can actually go sideways. It doesn't make any sense to me. You're in space. It's like, just imagine yourself in a submarine, for example. You don't always have to go forwards and turn. You can just turn sideways and stand still. But they never do that in these games. And the whole Star Wars universe, they don't have any ships that can do that. I'm like, that is so stupid.
That's a good point. I never thought of that.
So retarded. It's like, what are you, in an F-18? I mean, come on, this is supposed to be the future. It's like, jeez. So you always have to be.
They bank.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, why? It's so pointless. So, I mean, it would be so much more fun. Like, I used to play, when I was a little kid, I used to play a game called Descent. and where you could actually move side to side, and it was like 6 degrees kind of movement that you could do, and it was way more freeing and stuff. Like you could do so much more, and it was way more fun. So I just don't understand why these new games never do that. But well, I thought about it this morning. I was finished this thought. I thought about it this morning. Yeah, well, if they're recruiting for the army, of course they don't have that stuff right now, so they're going to be recruiting, people to fly F-18s and all these other planes and so on, not, futuristic, real futuristic, kind of things that can actually move side to side like that and so on and so forth. So, that kind of hit me.
The real anti-gravity craft fly in their own gravity bubble, and they could move 10,000 miles an hour, completely to the right.
Yeah.
With no G-forces, it doesn't kill the occupants of the ship.
Yeah, exactly. And they can go any direction. They don't have to just go forwards or backwards. Or,
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
And it's not like they have just a weapon on, the front of the ship or something, and you always have to be facing something to. It's just so ridiculous, so ridiculous. So you actually think about like the flying saucer sort of concept, and it actually makes way more sense, way more sense than any stupid crap we have, in our science fiction. So it's really weird to me, why would that be? What's the advantage to that? I just don't get it. And the whole thing with the Plejaren technology, where they have, whereas if you increase the firepower on their ships, it actually uses that energy to increase their shields. So it's kind of it's kind of funny. So it kind of makes them indestructible in a way.
Have you paid any attention to what's going on in mainstream ufology and the disclosure?
No, I don't care anymore.
I don't really either. I only see a little bit of it here and there. There is some strange stuff going on. You probably never heard of this fellow, Tom DeLonge.
No.
Oh, good. Because he's like a rock star turned UFO disclosure person.
Okay.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. But it's so different. I mean, the mainstream ufology has gone insane. But
it's designed that way to keep people away from the only ongoing case.
Yeah.
So the more they can distract people, the better. So
goodness, it's so absurd.
Yep.
But there's a lot of strange stuff going on now. I guess the government has actually released that they do have some UFO study program, and there's been some Navy pilots that have given some testimony about some of the things they've seen, and it's gone mainstream, and it's like, man, this is so old news.
No kidding.
But but you know how it is.
They're using it to distract people.
Boy, it works.
Yep. As long as they can keep people on cases that don't go anywhere, that's their butter zone. They're happy. That's what they want. So as long as people fall for that, and it just totally discredits the whole ufology thing, because then no actual scientist will touch it. No real journalist will touch it. So it's perfect for them. They've got their thing exactly where they want it. So, yep. They're not helping the cause at all. So
now, not to change the subject drastically, but so
gonna go on the football scores now?
No. So okay. You get a certain amount of, like, you're involved in like the formal study. You get certain materials from Switzerland, like once a month or something like that you go through in your studies, or?
I have just the passive membership at the moment. I'm applying for the spiritual teaching sort of aspect to it. So I haven't gotten into that yet. So
okay.
Yeah. So.
I wasn't sure yet, because I remembered you talking about that a little bit. And by the way, last time we talked, you talked about like when you went over and you spent a whole bunch of time, I guess, clearing out dead wood and trying to get rid of stumps and things like that. And they've filmed a lot of that. And now you can go online and see people doing that. And The reason I bring it up is because obviously we're not doing that in the United States on the West Coast, and we have these forest fires which are just out of control.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, humongous forest fires, like the
hundreds of times bigger than anything we've ever seen. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So there's a real reason why the Meier material are doing what the people are doing, what they're doing. I didn't know why they did all that all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Do they talk? Do they tell you about that when you go over there, or do they just like put you to work?
Oh no, well it's all just open book. If you want to ask about it, and they'll tell you. So it's
But
yeah.
if you don't ask, they don't tell necessarily.
Well, I mean they might. I don't know. It's just if it comes up, it comes up. So yeah, it's but it's nice. You know, it's nice to do, and it's fun anyway. So I don't really it's working with people and dealing with
it's very
nature
beautiful.
and stuff.
Very beautiful there in Switzerland.
Yeah, no kidding.
It reminds me a lot of my home over here, but we don't have as many pine trees.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
pine trees are beautiful.
Yeah, pine trees are green all the time.
Yeah.
They also, the droppings from pine trees, they will burn very easily.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and that's why it's probably some of the reason why we have so many fires right now on the West Coast.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we always putting out the fires, and that makes all this dead wood underneath and brush and so on, and then the fires are so bad after a while that all the soil is burnt and everything, and the forest can't even regrow after. So it's really, I don't know, desertification basically.
Exactly, and that's a perfect point. I was chatting a little bit with James Moore from the Future Mankind site, and I don't think he quite understood that. He says, "Oh, don't worry, they'll just grow back." I said, "Well, when you get a fire that's 270,000 acres, and it kills 70 or 80% of the wildlife in that area, and
it burns all the topsoil,
and it burns maybe half the topsoil off. We don't know what's going to happen from these fires."
No, I mean, stuff can't regrow from that, and that's the point. The soil is gone. So that's once the soil is destroyed, it takes forever to replace it.
My goodness, such a horrific. You know, the next thing that's going to happen is going to be the earthquakes.
Oh yeah, yep. Well, cause and effect.
Well, the San Francisco thing's been predicted for the longest time, right?
Yeah. So
in the Meier reports, and you know, his prophecies and predictions are not really like what I would call my big interest, but when you see them occurring and coming true, well, you got to stand up and take notice.
Yep, exactly. Exactly. I think the point of the contact still is the spirit teaching and learning how to discern for ourselves as individuals, not believing anyone. And so that falls into many categories, and religion is one of them. So obviously if your tendency is just to believe people all the time, whether they're academics or not, it doesn't make any difference. You're still going to be stuck on that. So yeah, the spirit teaching for me is still number one, and it's what I keep thinking about for myself and trying to apply, and starting to get back into it now after this rather interesting year. So it's nice to think about all that stuff again.
Do you have the book The Way to Live?
Yeah, that's a great book.
One of my favorite pages in this book is page 102. And let me read just a little bit of this. This is striving creates the life right up to the being. And striving means delectation, which is kind of satisfaction or enjoyment in a form which is always fulfilling and progressives. To be without striving means unwillingness and affliction. Affliction is inhibited striving and inhibited life. And one of the things that I've learned from all this is your own happiness is related directly to how hard you're willing to work.
Exactly.
Isn't that amazing? I never realized that. I would have never realized that on my own.
I keep trying to realize it, but Jesus, I'm so lazy sometimes.
Well, I am too.
Yeah. No, I'm. It's interesting because I look at my works that I've done in my lifetime that I consider my own personal successes, and it doesn't have to be anybody else's successes. I don't really care, like if they wouldn't consider them successes. I mean, so, but I consider them my own personal, little box of things that I've put together in my life that have worked out, and yeah, no, it's all the result of my own effort, and in fact, it was even efforts that were hampered by other people.
Right. And
so,
they often are.
Exactly. So, especially considering, that it goes so far against their way of seeing things and so on. So it's just like Galileo, in his story, everyone was hampering him. He was pretty much under house arrest for most of his life after not backing down from the Catholic Church and so on. So. And so, yeah, I mean, those were his efforts, and those efforts have paid off enormously. So you can be grateful that, he actually went against the grain in that sense, and it's been really helpful in our society. So without that, we wouldn't have anything. So.
Do you think that your German is good enough that you could actually work on a translation?
No. I haven't been working on it enough, and I need to get back into that this year. And so it would be nice to actually have a bit of time to dedicate towards that and so on as well.
Now,
dealing with a lot of other situations though right now.
Your wife speaks German though, right?
Yeah.
So does that help? Do you guys ever talk in German at all?
Yeah, I ask her lots of questions, like every day, actually. I ask her how to say this. Yeah. So, yeah, I'm trying to speak as much as I can,
But there's another whole level to it. Like I know a word here and there, and like when Billy is talking on these videos, I can't understand. Like maybe a word every 100 words I'll get. He said Geist form. I know what that is.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. No, it's kind of like the grammar and stuff is important too, and that's why I always kind of stuck to Rosetta Stone. I know a lot of people in Figu were kind of saying, well, it doesn't really go into the spirit teaching vocabulary, but I'm like, yeah, well, it's important not just to have that vocabulary, because you need to also have, grammar and so on. And for me, I learn orally, I learn visually, and just from books doesn't really work for me. I don't memorize stuff like that. My brain does not function that way. I just don't. It just does not work. So that's why I always flunked in school and never did really well and so on. So it's I think it's great. I think what they're doing is great with their way they teach it and so on. It's just instantaneous. Like you learn it instantly. There's no effort involved in memorizing there. There's no tests. There is, but it's not like you can just redo it if you fail it or whatever. And it's not the end of your life. So yeah.
What's interesting that you say that, because in computer programming, in the software engineering world, it's never memorization that makes you good. It's learning how to make something work, and it's like this process. And it's as much how you approach the problem, what your emotional status is, and things like that. Because I've been thinking about that before, and because I was thinking, well, what is it that makes you successful at this sort of thing? And it really doesn't have much to do with memorization.
No.
Because you learn when you figure out, what you can do with A and what you can do with B and what you can do with C. So you just know then what A, B, and C are because you use them.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like using a fork. Once you learn how to use a fork, you know what a fork is. You didn't have to memorize what a fork does because you use it, You didn't
have to memorize the history of forks and,
Although Might be interesting, but
Yeah, well, yeah,
I don't know
fine,
how much
great.
use that is. But
No, exactly. It's just like music history. I mean, you go to music school and all they teach you is freaking history of music. Well, who cares? Just can you play an instrument?
that's funny.
Can you play music? Can you actually record or, write something or do something musically speaking? Like history, I don't care. I don't care what some saxophone player did, 100 years ago. I don't care.
Well,
One iota.
to be tested on that, I think is kind of foolish. In
Ah,
some
it's
ways.
just dumb. Yeah, I mean, I don't mind learning that stuff. Like, yeah, I have some favorite musicians and stuff, and just by chance, I'll learn some things about them because I like this song or whatever. I mean, it has nothing to do with being a big snob about it and thinking, oh well, I'm a big failure because I'm not a historian. Whatever. Yeah. So that's the academic world for you, though. I mean, it's just so impractical. It's just so impractical. Like they focus on the least practical things and call it. I don't know what they call it, but I don't really care either. It's just so pointless. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, if you're studying science, fine, great. But even then, I've met PhD science students who didn't know like the difference between an element and a compound. So I'm just wondering, like, what? How can you even progress in science, in any field of science, without knowing that? It's that's like the basic science 101. You have to know that to even move on to the next stage. But again, they probably just memorized it for a test, forgot it, and that was the end. And then they just went to, memorizing, I should say, for the next test. They didn't learn squat. So
I worked at Ohio State for a year or so up at the biomedical research tower and working on a programming project, and it was tremendously traumatic. It was horrific. It was so horrible, man. Because I didn't want to get into it all, but it was really bad because the whole thing about the scholastic world is there's really not any accountability. Those people, those PhDs that work for universities, a lot of them just go on grant money. So they get millions of dollars from the government to go do something that may be a complete waste of time, particularly with the way they're going about doing it. So, yeah, you are dealing with people that are divorced from reality. They have
totally
kind of intelligence, but it's completely unapplicable.
Yeah. Yeah,
and it's weird because here I am, a person in the computer world, the software world, where everything is application.
Yeah.
And I'm dealing with a person who's supposed to be in the same field, and they have no application.
Yes.
So it's like I can't even have a conversation with this person because it's so weird. It just doesn't make any sense,
Yeah. I hear you.
It's so bizarre. That was very traumatic.
Yeah, yeah.
I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, I totally see what you're saying, and I've witnessed that. I've seen it. And I'm like, wow, I can't believe I'm having this conversation right now. It's just amazing. Like, I don't consider myself a genius at all, like not even a little bit, and I think it's just hilarious the conversations I've had with these like super, duper whatever PhD graduate, blah blah blah, whatever they want to call it. It's just wipe your ass with that piece of paper. It's just so, I can't believe I had those conversations. These people, these academics that just, they pin everything on the fact that they have those pieces of paper. And that's all it is pieces of paper. It's not in their brain. It has nothing to do with it's in their brain. It's I don't know. It's weird. It's weird. It's so detached from reality.
We were working on a project with a group out in San Diego at a college in San Diego, and it was we were doing software that was supposed to help with cancer research, and I remember they wanted me to travel out there because we had to have these meetings with the people in San Diego. Of course, we could have done it all online, but they had grant money and they wanted to spend it, and so they forced me to go out there. So yeah. So we got there, which is fine because I got to meet these people, and I actually liked them. They were really neat people. But the when you go to a cancer institute, you see all these people that are so sick. And the one thing I noticed being in San Diego, I've been to San Diego before because I had a friend out there. But the one thing I really noticed this time is the water is so highly chlorinated that literally my stomach could not handle it at all. And I couldn't drink it. I had to go out and buy bottled water just so I could have, and that's one of the major reasons why all those people are sick.
Yeah, for
because
sure.
The water is so horrible,
Yeah. No, I get city water here too, and I can't drink it. So I get water from a well to drink.
Yeah, we have a well, and then we actually, after we get the water from the well, we then run it through a filter.
Yeah, exactly.
And the difference is so incredible.
Oh yeah, it's huge. When I drink this city water, I start shaking. It's as if I had like 10 cups of coffee. I can't drink it. It's really bad for me. And I didn't know what the hell it was for a long time. And I just felt like this constant, like, super, like, anxiety sort of / shaking. And finally I figured out it was the water. It was the water. And as soon as I stopped drinking it, I felt better. So
that's incredible.
Yeah. And you can smell the chlorine. Like, it's bad. It's really bad. So
one of my other guests who, this is a long story. I've had a lot of very strange occurrences with guests lately, but one, his name is Cody Snodgrass, and he is a CIA black ops guy who basically tried to get out of the business. Okay. So and they tried to kill him twice because he knows too much. Right. And he flatlined twice, like, where the pulse stops and they have to shock him and bring him back. Uh-huh. And the show that I had scheduled like last week, he got into a horrific car accident. And I'm thinking, wow, was this a hit? And he did come out and talk on another radio show, and he said he didn't think it was a hit. But totaled his car, and he was in the hospital for a while. But
jeez.
So anyway, what he was saying is when he was in the CIA, he knew of three ways that they were attacking the people, I guess, of the whole freaking world. Particularly one way was fluoride in the water, which you probably have known. But I think the chlorine is almost as bad for you.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's designed to kill microorganisms. Well, your body's full of those. So guess what happens?
It kills all the good microorganisms in your gut, right?
Yeah, you don't have to be a physicist to figure that one out.
Yeah.
Yep. Anyways. What's the other ones?
So it was the fluoride, and he also said the glyphosates in the food. Yeah. Have you ever heard of the glyphosates in the food?
You mean like pesticides and stuff?
Yes.
Yeah.
And then he also included one thing that the Meier material doesn't agree with, I don't think, and that he says in some cases they are spraying nano-aluminum into the air. And one of the things he talked about, which was very interesting, in the Gulf War, he said that the depleted uranium that we were using in M1A1 Abrams tanks and the A-10 Warthog, which was, one of the ground attack planes, that would superheat and create this ionizing gas in the air, which people would breathe in, particularly our service people, and that was low-level radiation, which affected the sperm.
Yeah.
And then they would go home and end up giving that same thing to their wife, which would go to their offspring.
Yeah.
And
so on and so forth.
Yeah, that's one of the big reasons. Remember the Oklahoma City bombing?
Mm-hmm.
Well, the reason that was bombed was to destroy some of the records associated with all that.
Yeah, I guess they were gonna put a bunch of lawsuits together or something, and it was just gonna cost the government a huge amount.
You know, the background noise just went way down.
Oh, yeah, that's the
Di-
furnace. Sorry.
Oh, is that your furnace?
Yeah, it's cold here, so
Okay, I
we
didn't
gotta
know if
keep
that
that
was
thing going.
part of the recording. I thought that was the recording.
Yeah. No,
So the
no,
recording's
it's my
good?
my machine arms here. I'm just no, just kidding. Go ahead.
Okay. But the recording's good, so that's good to know.
Right on.
That the recording is good. But yeah, there's so much going on, man, I tell you.
Yeah. Well, it's just there it is.
One of the,
That's what I always kind of felt about it. Well, there it is. Great. So I think we just need to find some ways around that, and let's just be practical and get on with it. So
that's
because it's
why
happening. Of course, it's happening.
I keep going back to this book, The Might of Thoughts, which, when he talks about neutral positive, and I think we had this discussion before, it's more positive than what I really originally realized. Because he talks about being optimistic, confident, relaxed, cheerful, enthusiastic, thankful. And that, I know there's a lot of times when I am not relaxed or thankful or cheerful.
Yeah.
Particularly when I wake up first thing in the morning. Oh, no.
Yeah.
It's like I have to that's why I always read the book first thing in the morning.
Yeah. All right on. Yeah.
To try to get my...
Well, you can get all those things naturally just by figuring things out. And that's kind of what I figured out before I started doing my calculations, before I started building them, before I started building a framework, the testing framework. And basically what I was noticing is that when I would sort of figure out things, basically, and kind of remove contradictions in my own understanding of things, that the confidence would just kind of naturally follow. So it's not something... Yeah, and the happiness and the optimism and all that stuff too, and so on. So the reason I wanted to, face the facts head on, even the ugly facts and so on of reality and so on, is just because when you kind of neutralize that, you kind of eventually find the solution to it as well. So it's kind of comes all together in one little package, and it's just a tidy little arrangement. It works really well. So
do you have your quote unquote calculations handy?
It's in my brain.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, in the last few minutes, can you tell us a little bit about some of those?
Yeah. I guess it's just it's a testing framework. Basically, I made it before I found the Meier case, but I went to when I was 11 years old a UFO conference, and it was just basically. It just left me hanging with a bunch of questions and nothing answered. And it was just making me realize that all the whole UFO industry and so on was just designed to string people along, never to actually give you answers, and basically discredit the UFO phenomenon. That was the entire purpose of it. So I I spent years making this framework so that I would actually find the one case that I knew had to exist. And so I figured out first what country it would likely come public and in what year it would likely come public. And based on my observations through looking at what kind of things you would look for in a country if you were to put this thing together, would be things like political neutrality, social progressive social structures like Switzerland, huge interest in engineering and science, because in Switzerland it's such a small country, they can't just dig oil out of the ground and sell it to some other countries. So they actually have to, in order to stay competitive, they actually have to manufacture goods and really high quality and so on. So sort of like Japan and Germany and so on. So and also geographically, when you look at Switzerland, it's sort of in the middle of the globe, so to speak. So if you're going from Australia to Switzerland, it's kind of just as easy as if you're going from North America to Switzerland. Whereas if it was in Australia or if it was in North America, it would be very difficult.
Hmm.
So this is why, for example, world leaders and so on get together in Switzerland. And also, of course, the political neutrality plays a huge part in that. Also, yeah, it's not. It's the financial system in Switzerland is such that they actually keep criminals on a tight leash, and nobody would want to attack Switzerland because they can see that they can actually store their wealth there very safely. So that's why they can remain politically neutral, and it'll kind of weather financial storms a lot better than most other countries as a result of that as well. And also just their history is deeply, deeply, deeply rooted in independence and so on compared to any other country in the world. Switzerland is. The William Tell Overture, that's what that song was based on. And I guess his story was a big part of developing that neutrality or that independence and so on and so forth. And so, yeah, Switzerland just becomes sort of an unbeatable choice. There's other reasons for it as well, regarding language and regarding just many, many things. And so there's no other country that competes with even one of those factors, much less all of those factors put together. So it just becomes the choice premier. Like, there's no competition anywhere in the world. They actually have direct democracy where they vote on issues 4 times a year rather than just for people. So
Wow.
in Canada, we haven't had a referendum in 20, 30 years. So it's been a long time, where we've actually been able to vote on an issue here. And so it makes even Canada's democracy very envious in that sense. As for the timing, 1975, you just look at, I was interested in Star Wars, like I said earlier, and so George Lucas would explain when he brought out his movies again, his old movies from the 1970s and 80s, he brought them out again in 1990s with computer graphics and so on and so forth, doing some editing and stuff to make the picture more clear, because the movies were actually decaying in storage much faster than they had anticipated. So they wanted to sort of restore the movies and so on. And but they also, of course, added a bunch of things and fixed a bunch of things that you couldn't do even in the 70s and 80s, even with the biggest budgets ever spent at the time for a movie. So those were record-breaking films in terms of spending and investment. So I think the first one cost like $30 million or something in that time, and that is a lot of money at that time. So, so yeah, he did a very good job explaining the difference between film photography and digital photography, what you could and couldn't do now versus then, or even in the mid 1990s versus then. And the computer graphics, even in the mid 1990s, were not even as good looking as today's video games. So it tells you a lot of, and that was with millions and millions of dollars spent just on that aspect alone, on the computer graphics side of it at the time. So anyway, so if you kind of look at that, you look at the timing of when computers came into existence, and which is personal computers, I should say. The first sort of usable, more or less, PC came out in like 1981, I think it was, like beginning of 1980s anyways. And so if you really wanted to take a case like this public, you would want it so that people can do some testing at home in the end. But you also wanted it so that only people, in the very beginning, only people in the biggest labs like NASA, JPL, IBM, and so on and so forth would be able to actually test the evidence, the physical evidence, to their own satisfaction. And if they can't duplicate it, then that kind of creates the most controversy for the case long term. And then once personal computers come out and so on, then people can start doing their own tests. Then you have the internet. That's the most interesting part in all of this, is that the internet provides a platform to spread this information without it being too heavily affected by government or power organizations of various kinds. And so, whereas the old system where you just had television news channels and radio news channels and so on is a lot easier to control. So internet, even today, is hard to have the internet not influence elections and so on and so forth, like we saw with WikiLeaks, for example, and so on. And so, yeah, just the timing of it, it would have to be around 1975. And at the time when I was younger, like when I was still building the framework, it was kind of the window of time would have been like between 1975 and like 1982. And so that was kind of like my window frame because of the computer age and what George Lucas was explaining and so on and so forth and all that stuff. And but not just that, the actual aspect of what would have to happen before the case came public in 1975 is that Meier would have had to have educated himself a lot about all the subjects relating to politics, religion, everything, and so spirituality as well, and so on. And so he would have had to travel through places like the Middle East, where most of the religions were founded, and where most of the sort of political tensions are really, the frictions are really most centered, and so on around the globe. And so he had to do that in a time when it was still safe to travel by foot through these areas. Mm-hmm. You can't do that today. There's no way you can do that today. So
you'd be killed.
You'd be killed, and especially if he was a woman. So it had to be a man as well. So if he was a single woman traveling through the Middle East and wanting to meet Saddam Hussein, for example, or any of these people, like, forget it. No way. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't mean that women don't play a vital role in our development. They played the most vital role in our development, actually, but it had to be a man for the contact case, as far as I'm concerned, for that reason. And because even in Switzerland, they weren't allowed to vote. The women were not allowed to vote at the time, even then. So the women's movement, women's liberation movement, has really been in its infancy, and it still is basically in most parts of the world. So even in the Western world. So it's there's many other things I got about the timing of his birth and like just the year and so on, just based on Chinese calendars and stuff like that. So I mean, but that's kind
great.
Of, if you could figure out the timing and like the year and the location, the country, then you pretty much have it licked. I mean, there's no two cases that are going to have that timing and that location. So,
right.
Of coming public. So then that really shrinks your window of what you have to look for and how much time you're going to spend looking for different, for this particular case or whatever it might be, enormously. So you're not going to be stuck then, going to UFO conferences and trying to figure out, is this guy telling the truth? Is that guy telling the truth? Blah, blah, blah. Well, no, if they don't have that time and location of coming public, then it's very unlikely for many reasons. And it's unlikely for their motives as well, that their motives would be useful or practical or what's the word, progressive, in actually helping us get away from these power groups and these power organizations and so on. So, because the whole point is to disrupt all of that, and so the best way to do that, again, Switzerland 1975. You can't do this from Saudi Arabia or the United States. Politically, it'd be crushed.
Right.
So, one huge advantage to Switzerland is that the people also, because of the way that democracy is formed and works, is that people are already used to working together.
Right.
Whereas in North America, for example, everyone wants to be the big hero, and that sort of thing, and it's just not really practical. So
too much.
That's
ego.
why, too much ego. So people don't work together very well. They quarrel too much, and it's just nothing can happen. So, whereas at the center, for example, they vote on all issues. So if there's anything that comes up, they vote on it, and there's nobody, calling the shots in that sense or whatever. So, And that's handy. You want that because as soon as Billy dies, for example, or whoever,
Mm-hmm.
you don't want that to be completely reliant on him, do you? Because
Right.
then it's going to completely collapse after he dies. So you want it to be a structured framework where everybody understands it, everybody comes to the table with the same, um, just the same understanding of how to vote and so on, and how things kind of decisions are made, as a group and so on. So nobody just kind of runs wild with their own ego and it destroys everything. So
Well, thanks, Daniel. It's been a great conversation, man. I just really enjoyed it. I appreciate everything you say and bring to the show.
yeah, well, thanks for having me on. I always love having our chats. You're always a ball of sunshine too, so it's great.
All right, buddy. Thank you so much. I'll post this, man. And again, thanks for
Sounds
your
good.
perspective. I appreciate it.
Cool. Thanks. We'll talk soon.
Bye bye.